call for action. A top senator wants to move forward with a bill banning abortion after 20 weeks. We'll tell you what's holding it up. Surviving terror. A teen describes her horrific encounter with Boko Haram. The moment that changed the world. An assassin targets Pope John Paul II. You'll hear from a man who was there during the attack. And saluting our troops. The president leads a special ceremony honoring an Army sergeant who went above and beyond. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 13th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us on this feast of Our Lady of Fatima. I'm Brian Patrick. Looking at news now, there is a new move tonight to ban most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. Today's push comes exactly 1 year after abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell was found guilty of the murder of 3 infants who survived his abortion attempts. Jason Calvi begins our coverage from the U.S. Capitol tonight. Jason?
13 states have already banned most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. The House approved a similar bill, but it stalled in the Senate. So today, pro-life leaders and several senators got together to urge passage of this bill. It's called the Pain-Capable Child Protection Act. It limits abortion to when an unborn child can feel pain. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham and 40 Republican co-sponsors are behind the Senate bill. It does give exceptions in the case of rape, incest, or the health of the mother. The question is, when does the unborn child feel pain? Britain's Royal College of OBGYN said it's known that the fetus withdraws from a needle from about 18 weeks. With that, Senator Graham urged Senate Majority Leader Democrat Harry Reid to allow the Senate to vote on this bill.
If that's not right, this is why you have debates. Take us on. Prove us wrong. Say that's not right. Let's have an honest, open debate. It makes sense to me because the doctors I've talked to say yes, they definitely can feel pain at this point in time. And if most of the world outlaws abortions at this point, there's got to be a reason. I think the reason is the child is so far down the road of being born, this is not the right thing to do.
So the question is, our laws, is this bill constitutional? The Arizona law banning abortions after 20 weeks was struck down at the appellate level. But we spoke to one law professor from the University of St. Thomas who says because of the Supreme Court's Gonzalez versus Carhart, she feels that these laws and this bill would be upheld by the Supreme Court.
That the court is willing to allow pre-viability bans of particular types of abortion. This bill is premised on the idea that they would also be willing to entertain a strong limitation or ban at 20 weeks.
And Brian, I do have a statement here from NARAL Pro-Choice America. They say that these bans, they say, are so extreme that they offend even the most basic sense of common decency. Again, that's the statement from NARAL Pro-Choice America. Brian?
That's Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. And Marjorie Dannenfelser is joining us, the president of Susan B. Anthony List. You've just come from the news conference. We saw you there behind Lindsey Graham. Do you think this bill has a shot to pass in the Senate?
Oh, well, without question, it's headed for a successful Senate vote. Will it be this particular Senate? No, it probably won't. But we've got a good job on our hands, and that is to change the makeup of the Senate. And this issue will help rearrange the Senate and leaning towards us and on our side on the pro-life issue.
Gosnell was convicted of killing 3 babies because they were out of the womb. What is the difference between that and killing them or aborting them in the womb, late-term abortion?
Yeah, you know, it's really just a matter of inches. It's about geography. It's where that human being happens to be at the moment. I mean, this is a grief to be 1 year out from that Gosnell horror. Anniversaries are sometimes to be celebrated and sometimes griefs. This is a grievous moment. But I really think something beautiful can be made out of this. We see it with the Lord's help over and over and over again, and that is that we begin to save lives.
Has the pro-life movement made any significant progress in this year?
Yes, tremendous efforts have been made and succeeded. And in fact, I think that the Gosnell horror really shocked the system of a lot of Americans and really got to work passing this 20-week bill on the state level in 13 states. We worked very hard and had a successful vote in the House of Representatives with all women leadership. Now Senator Graham is shepherding it through the Senate. It may take a little bit of a new Senate makeup to actually pass this bill, but it is the new partial birth abortion ban. And And that means we can save 18,000 children a year. 18,000.
Isn't it ironic that it takes something so horrible to get people's attention? What challenges lie ahead?
Well, the challenges are right now, Senator Reid, who is a self-proclaimed pro-life Democrat, doesn't want to see this bill. He sees it as politically dangerous for there to be a vote in the Senate, and we know why. There are a lot of Senate elections coming up. They don't want to take that vote. That's the biggest obstacle we have right now. And really, the only other major obstacle is a pretty darn big one. It's the President of the United States. So this is a two-part process. We've got a great opportunity to change the makeup of the Senate, and we're planting the seeds of this in the presidential primaries as well.
You were the master of ceremonies for that news conference today, and you said there was a lot of media there.
Yes.
That's a victory in itself.
I agree, Brian. And you know, right around the time of that horror, I was talking to reporters for the first time from mainstream outlets that were really starting to come around to our point of view. There were people that I'd talked to for quite some time, but they were actually able to listen a little bit more. Most people said there really was no coverage. The truth is there might not have been as much coverage, but there was a lot of internal dynamic going on among a lot of people, including members of the media, who I understand are human beings.
They are. Marjorie Dannenfelser with the Susan B. Anthony list. Thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, Brian.
We'll have you back. Some other news that we're covering, our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The National Catholic Prayer Breakfast celebrated 10 years here in Washington this morning. President George W. Bush spoke at the breakfast each year during his second term. The Obama administration was not represented today. Speakers warned of the changing reality for prayerful, faithful believers.
My friends, the days of acceptable Christianity are over. The days of comfortable Catholicism are past.
As we go forward with the work of the Church in the 21st century, business as usual is not enough. We must move from a maintenance mode to a missionary one. We must ask ourselves, what does it mean to live in a culture of unbelief? A culture which does not even know that it doesn't believe because it still lives on the residue of Christian culture.
You can watch the entire broadcast of the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast tomorrow morning at 9 Eastern and again Thursday at 10:30 a.m. right here on EWTN. Well, we told you about a Harvard University club planning a black mass last night. At the last minute, that student group dropped its sponsorship of the event amid the uproar over it. But a holy hour of adoration and benediction planned as a response to the Black Mass was held on Harvard's campus. St. Paul's Parish was overflowing last night. An estimated 2,000 people gathered in prayer. Harvard's president, Drew Faust, did attend, as she promised. The search continues in Nigeria for more than 200 schoolgirls abducted by the terrorist group Boko Haram. A government official said today all options are open in their efforts to rescue the teen girls. But not everyone agrees Nigerian authorities are doing enough. Our Wyatt Spencer joins us with more tonight. Wyatt?
Yes, Brian, right now a lot of people in northeast Nigeria are living in fear. Many are worried about Boko Haram because the terrorists are holding these teenage girls captive, and they've killed more than 1,000 people while torturing others over the past few years. They've also burned and destroyed homes and churches. Today at the Hudson Institute, a think tank here in Washington, one of the survivors of a Boko Haram abduction spoke about her experience. She says she fears for the teenagers abducted on April 15th from their school. She also worries for other Christians like her, who she says are being targeted because of their faith. She recounted a painful experience in 2011 when armed terrorists entered her home. The men killed her father because he was a Christian pastor and then turned their guns on her brother.
So the leader told them to kill him too. So they go ahead and shoot him twice in his chest. So he fall. When he fall, he started like moving. So they go ahead and shoot him again, one in his mouth, and then he fall down and died. So I was in shock. I didn't know what was happening. So they put me in the middle of my dad and my brother. So the next day, the army came and picked them to the Marjorie and take me to hospital.
The members of Boko Haram are fighting for what they call a pure Islamic state ruled by Sharia law. Yesterday, the group released video of the captured schoolgirls who they have threatened to sell into slavery. Nigeria's government has been criticized for its response to the kidnapping, saying they have not done enough and not acted fast enough. Brian, the U.S. is sending a reconnaissance aircraft to help in the search. The use of drones has been considered, but at this point not used.
Very moving story. Thank you, Wyatt. Months of violence have displaced more than 1 million people in South Sudan. Now an aid group is warning the country faces starvation on a massive scale. A field hospital run by Doctors Without Borders in a remote part of the country is treating patients suffering from hunger and disease. Since that clinic opened last Thursday, the group has screened 600 children, finding at least 50 who face dire malnutrition. They also have malaria, measles, and respiratory infections. Residents left this town because of violence, but they're returning to find their homes burned and looted. World leaders, including the UN Secretary General, are saying that if people don't return home and plant crops this month, there will be no food to eat. The Yemeni army is on the offensive when it comes to al-Qaeda. One of the army's jets struck 3 trucks that were moving weapons and ammunition across that country. The airstrike killed 8 people. Some of them are suspected al-Qaeda militants. A landmark decision from the European Union today concerns privacy online. A European court has ruled that, at least in some cases, people should have input over what pops up when people search your name online. The ruling says Google has to change some search results when people request it. It's part of the so-called right to be forgotten. That right has generally been well received in Europe, but many in the United States have criticized it as a form of censorship. The critics say convicts could delete references to their crimes, or politicians could airbrush their records. There's a lot of news this evening on the so-called gay marriage front, beginning in Virginia. An appeals court is taking a look at a law there that says some same-sex marriages are invalid. The 3-judge panel heard arguments today after a judge struck down the law earlier this year. The Virginia Attorney General says he won't defend the state's definition of marriage as a union of a man and a woman. That's because he thinks it's unconstitutional. Lawyers for the court clerk who denied a couple marriage certificates are now defending that law instead. Meanwhile, in Arkansas, most county clerks are ignoring the fact that a county judge ruled against that state's gay marriage law. 70 out of the 75 county clerks say they won't issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Many of them are waiting for the state Supreme Court to make a more definitive ruling. Also of note, 5 gay couples in Alaska have filed suits against that state, or rather asking for recognition of gay marriage in that state. In New England, a police officer dies in the line of duty. He was responding to a domestic dispute yesterday evening in New Hampshire. That's when police say Michael Nolan, the son of the homeowner, opened fire. The house later exploded. We're not sure at this point why that happened. New Hampshire's Governor Maggie Hassan issued a statement saying the entire state of New Hampshire is in mourning over the tragic loss of Brentwood officer Steve Arkell. Officer Arkell bravely answered the call of duty and made the ultimate sacrifice, a heroic demonstration of his commitment to the safety of his fellow citizens. Ironically, this officer's death comes during National Police Week. Around this time every year, officers from across the country visit the Law Enforcement Memorial here in Washington, D.C., remembering all the officers who have died serving their communities. Coming up, we hear from a cardinal who spoke with John Paul II about the moment a gunman tried to kill the Pope. And it's not his fame or charm that makes John Paul II a saint, but his relationship with Christ. This new video tells that story. On this feast of Our Lady of Fatima, 97 years after the apparition of Our Lady, you're watching EWTN News Nightly, and today marks a significant anniversary in the life of St. John Paul II. 33 years ago today, on this feast day, he was shot and wounded in St. Peter's Square. Our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren takes us back to that faithful day.
Rome's Divine Mercy Shrine, a piece of St. John Paul II's legacy in the Eternal City, where today a statue of Our Lady of Fatima stands watch. The late Pope always said that she saved his life on this day in 1981.
It was a spring day like this one in Rome. The Pope was just down the street in St. Peter's Square. He was riding in the Pope-mobile when gunshots were fired.
4 bullets would strike him, fired from the hand of Ali Agsha. The most serious injury was from the 2 shots that went through his abdomen. He was rushed to a nearby hospital and saved despite the great loss of blood. The head of St. Peter's Basilica, Cardinal Angelo Comastri, met St. John Paul II in private audience for the first time 10 years after the attempt. He asked the Pope what happened, and this is what the Pope Saint told him.
Quel giorno, 13 maggio 1981,
that day, May the 13th, 1981, while an assassin hand shot to kill me, I felt, and he said this with great strength, I felt a maternal hand that stopped me at death's door. Before losing consciousness, he said to me, inside myself, I felt this. And, he repeated this again, I felt the certainty that I would not die. And so it was. From that day forward, my life was totally for the Lord, more than ever. And he added, hand in hand with Mary. And I can still see his gesture, hand in hand with Mary.
E aggiunse, aggrappato alla mano di Maria. E vedo ancora il gesto della mano.
St. John Paul II recognized his protectress in Our Lady of Fatima, so much so that he left a bullet in her crown in Portugal as a remembrance. Alan Holdren in Rome, EWTN News Nightly.
David DePero was there that day, an eyewitness. He was only 9 years old at that assassination attempt. David, you had just greeted the Holy Father. You were within arm's reach of him, and then all chaos breaks out. What did you hear? What did you see? What was it like?
It was a very surreal experience. We had just had the Pope shake our hands, myself, my sisters, and when he came around again, I heard the sound of popping like fireworks. I was very confused. This was out of place. And the Pope had been shot. The Jeep went off, and there we were.
What did you experience as a 9-year-old?
Well, I think as a child, you don't know how to feel. And what I felt was confusion. Oddly, I felt guilt. I felt guilt that I didn't feel sad. Other people were crying. I started crying, kind of empty tears. Now I know that it was shock, but then I just felt, what's wrong with me? Why am I not sad? The Pope was just shot.
So you were in a state of shock, basically.
I was.
A kid that really didn't know what to do. I understand that you have some facts about that day that aren't widely known. What are they?
They're not widely known. Most people don't know that there were other people who were shot that day, including a young woman in our group. The bullet went through her elbow, which is only inches away from the head of the nun in our group. She was resting it to take a photo. And she was left behind in the hospital. We went on to a CC. We had a prayer service to pray for her and for the Pope and for the other woman who was shot. And all of them survived, which was a great miracle. God guided the bullet in those cases, too.
Well, I remember that day like it was yesterday. I was already in the media, and I could not believe that right after, just a few years after his election, this dynamic Pope was shot, and we all thought he was going to die. What did you think?
I think when something serious, really dangerous happens to a person of such boisterous, lively joy, that it deepens that person. And I do think it deepened John Paul, even though he was already very deep. I'm imputing that to him. For me, being kind of an introvert, kind of a deep person already, I like to focus on the joy of forgiveness, that he forgave his attacker. That brings him joy. That brings him joy even now in heaven, that he forgave his attacker. And I think it's one of the reasons that he's a saint.
Yeah, part of his sainthood, definitely. It's so good to have you with us, and thank you for sharing that wonderful story with us, and God bless you.
Thank you, Brian. Wonderful to be here and to have a new saint.
An eyewitness to the assassination attempt. What started as a hobby is becoming an online sensation. Catholic Links was founded to teach people about the Holy Father and the Church through animated videos like this one. And the popularity of these cartoons is growing. Catholic Links produced one video about Pope Francis in 20 languages that's been seen by 1 million people, and today they're releasing a new video about St. John Paul II, and we spoke with one of the filmmakers.
I've seen a lot of videos, and you see a lot of things that come out on the news that talk about St. John Paul II, but many times I had this sensation that many people didn't really understand who he was still. And the most important part of John Paul II wasn't only the fact that he did a lot of trips, that he spoke to a lot of people, that he was very famous, that he had a role to play with a political role to play in comedies and all these kind of things. The most important part, and to really understand who he was, you have to understand his relationship with Christ.
Johnson and the team at Catholic Links say they want to send the message that if you put your life in the hands of God, He will do great things through you, a message certainly inspired by St. John Paul II. You can find the video on Catholic Link's Facebook page or by visiting SJP2. That's sjp2.catholic-link.com. Up next, honoring those who serve, how the president and the nation are recognizing a very special soldier. And more on the Clippers controversy, what the NBA team's new CEO is doing now that he's in charge. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 13th, I'm Brian Patrick, and today the president honored the 7th living Medal of Honor recipient of Afghanistan or Iraq. This is the 7th winner of this honor since the Vietnam War. Former Army Sergeant Kyle White came to Washington, D.C. today to receive the military's highest honor. Michelle Sigona covered the White House ceremony. Michelle?
It's been 6 long years since Sergeant White was involved in a deadly enemy ambush in Afghanistan. November 2007, 5 soldiers and 1 Marine were killed. Today, Sergeant White, members from his platoon, and his family are with the president to receive this nation's highest honor.
Sergeant White was in the military only 21 months and at only 20 years old when he was involved in the fight of his life. No matter what he faced on that fateful day, November 9th, 2007, he instantly knew how to dive in and save the wounded and the fallen.
That's when a single shot rang out, then another, and then an entire canyon erupted with bullets coming from what seemed like every direction.
As the platoon returned fire in the village, at one point Sergeant White was knocked unconscious. When he came to, with shrapnel embedded in his face, he began to answer his call of duty, making rescues of the wounded and deceased.
Kyle saw a teammate, Specialist Kane Schilling, trying to treat his own shattered arm using a tree as cover, what Kane later called the smallest tree on earth. I'm sure that's how it felt. Kyle sprinted through enemy fire to Kane's side and began applying a tourniquet.
After saving one teammate, he then began to attempt to pull an injured Marine to cover again. And in a life-saving move, he was able to secure a radio to call for help.
Somehow, miraculously, they never hit him, not once. One of his teammates said it was as if Kyle was moving faster than a speeding bullet.
Today, Sergeant White wears each one of those names etched on a bracelet on his arm. And around his neck, the world will recognize his valor.
As for Kyle White, he's not in the military any longer. He did receive his bachelor's degree, and now he works behind a desk as an analyst.
Our Michelle Sigona reporting from the White House. Thanks a lot, Michelle. Also at the White House today, a renewed push for immigration reform. President Obama met with business leaders today. He talked about the economic benefits of immigration reform. Several bishops will also raise their voices on this subject later this month. They'll visit Capitol Hill, urging members of Congress to pass immigration reform in the House. Now to what's becoming a tunnel of horror in Turkey. At least 15 people have already died there. Hundreds more are trapped at this mine about 150 miles south of Istanbul after an explosion. Rescuers have already evacuated 20 people. 11 of them had suffered injuries. There's been another deadly mining accident, this one here in the States in West Virginia. 2 people were killed late last night. The mine has had trouble in the past. Federal safety officials call it a pattern violator, that term referring to mines that have repeatedly violated federal regulations. Well, football games can get pretty rough, even violent sometimes, but what's happened off the field is causing concern in Minnesota. Prosecutors say Rutgers quarterback Philip Nelson got into a fight with a former college football player. Some surveillance video shows that. Authorities say Nelson kicked the former player in the face. Witnesses say it was because of a dispute involving Nelson's girlfriend. He is now facing 2 felony assault charges, and Rutgers has cut Nelson from its football program in response. More developments in the ongoing LA Clippers NBA controversy. The new interim CEO running the team is Dick Parsons. He met with the management and staff of the Clippers yesterday. He says he's confident the league will succeed in forcing a sale of the team. Owner Donald Sterling has been banned for life by the NBA and fined $2.5 million after recordings of him making racist comments surfaced. Sterling's wife is speaking out as well. She has suggested in interviews that her husband may have some form of dementia. Before we leave you, we take a step back to a time some call the golden age of music. The Grammy Museum in Los Angeles is opening a new California Dreamin' exhibit. Here, visitors get the chance to revisit the sights and sounds of California's Laurel Canyon music scene. From the 60s to the 70s, this was a place that names like Jim Morrison, Joni Mitchell, the Eagles, Carole King, and others called home. Music fans can see a hand-painted rocking chair with Mama Cass Elliot, and even Frank Zappa's handwritten lyrics.
The music scene in Los Angeles at the time was just incredibly vibrant because of what had already started on Sunset Boulevard about 5 or 6 years earlier. The opening of the Whiskey, many of the bands like the Doors, got to play there.
Rock and roll fans, that exhibit runs through November 30th, so you better get to LA. And be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can catch us anytime you like, again, on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching. Remember, we're now on 5 nights a week, so we'll see you tomorrow. Good night and God bless you.